Welcome to this first ever podcast of SOS. What is SOS? Well, SOS stands for States of Splendor. States of Splendor is actually a magazine. We used to be a weekly radio show broadcast on the FM radio waves from Montreal, Canada. So it's now being transferred to an online magazine, as well as a bi-weekly podcast, meaning every 2 weeks. States of Splendor is a magazine, and the best way to explain would be to start to read you our mission, which is available on our website, which is statesofsplendor.com. The States of Splendor is a unique magazine which links together various realities of civilization. This initiative aims to offer visibility to illustrious phenomena which, by the splendor that lies within them, represent the excellence of multiple cultures found throughout the world. States of Splendor is a window unto individuals, businesses, places, as well as intangible heritage that are worth transmitting to future generations of this ever-evolving global village. So splendor is a pretty large subject. Splendor can be found in large constructions, feats of human architecture, people, businesses, but it can also be found in small things. And splendor is often overlooked in the small things that we come into contact with every day. Such as, for example, simple as flowers can be, flowers can also be magnificent things, like these lilies, for instance. These lilies are magnificent flowers. Of course, we've all seen flowers before. However, if you take the time and smell, not the roses, but the lilies in this case, you can see that this is a magnificent treasure that is given to us, the beauty of it and the fragrance. And they're not yet completely open, they're going to open more. And you can witness the cycle of nature within them, and you can go on and on. This is just to say that sometimes splendor is found in small things just as well as in big things, in the macrocosm, but in the microcosm as well. So, in this complex world of the late 2017s, we at States of Splendor will solely focus on the splendid phenomena of this world and the beauty of this world. So here at SOS, we do our best to keep it positive and celebrate the best of the world's heritage. So this is the podcast for you to sit back and relax, get comfortable, and just let yourself be intrigued by each voyage that's proposed into the multitude of the states of splendor found on this planet. So let's start, and let's get into this material. So why do we aim to concentrate on the positive things and not talk about the negative things? Well, first of all, we consider that other people do a very good job at it, and there's two main principles that guide us here. One is a very simple one learned at driving lessons, where my driving teacher told me that when you're driving, you definitely don't want to look at where you don't want to go. Otherwise, you'll end up on the sidewalk or some other accident-prone destination. Where you want to look is where you want to go. You drive and you look in the direction where you want to drive. So that's one of the principles that are guiding us at States of Splendor. And the second principle is the most interesting of all. It's best illustrated by a small story that I learned when I was in grade 6, actually. A very interesting one that was brought forth by a visiting scientist that came to our class. He was talking about a trip that he had made in northern Quebec to a Inuit village. He had lived there for quite some time. He had been wonderfully welcomed by the people of the place, by the Inuk, and he had done some tests to see the quality of the environment there. So he did some tests on the water, on the earth, on various specimens of flora and on different animals. And he went back to Montreal to have those tests done. He decided to come back to the village to announce the results of these tests. So he gathered some important people of the village, and there were some elders there, of course. And so he announced the results that were actually quite saddening to him. And he announced that, unfortunately, the earth of the environment surrounding that village was quite polluted, had some traces of pollutants in it. The water as well was unfortunately polluted. There was some species that were becoming rarer and rarer. The population was declining. The fish had mercury inside it. There were traces of other heavy metals found throughout the different meats. Because of this, it was impossible to eat certain species that they were used to hunting for a living, and this was quite saddening to him. He gave those results to the population of this village, and what was interesting was the reply of one of the elders. The Inuits voyage with a dog sled, traditionally, and he said, if you have 2 lines of dogs on your dog sled, and you have 6 dogs pulling you towards the south, but you want to go towards the north. If you have 6 dogs pulling you towards the south and 5 dogs pulling you towards the north, you shouldn't bother about the 6 dogs pulling you towards the south. All you really have to do is concentrate on finding 2 dogs to pull you towards the north, and you'll slowly start advancing towards the north. So concentrate on finding those 2 dogs. So this is something that guides us and is quite a good compass for us here at States of Splendor. So we're interested by people, things, businesses, and places which are representative of a small corner of the world. In this fast-paced world of today, where there's so many worries, so many dangers, there's also so many beautiful things. And this podcast aims to concentrate on the beauty of the world and the hope that's still found in this world. There's magnificent endeavors and initiatives that are being done in this world. Bridges are being built. The world is becoming an ever smaller place, and this helps us to come into contact with the marvels that every culture has to offer. So sometimes 2 same objects or products are made in different parts of the same country or the same city even, and they have a subtle difference, and it's this difference that sometimes has something useful to say. So this is one of the most important reasons for which we travel here at the States of Splendor. So let's kick off today's route and head to our first destination. And our first destination is where all roads lead to, which is Rome. So we're going to visit the Mercato Trionfale, or the Mercato Trionfale. What's known in the US as a farmer's market, but it's not actually a farmer's market, it's just a regular market. There are many markets in Rome, many are very touristic. This is actually the biggest market in Rome, but it's not usually visited by tourists. It's one that's visited by everyday Romans. Another one that we're going to explore is a magnificent story. When I was a child, there was an animated film that actually won an Oscar, and it was called The Man Who Planted Trees. It was a wonderful story done by an illustrator that was from Montreal, which was Frederick Bach, and he spent years and years and years just drawing each picture of this animation film. He had to draw thousands and thousands. It was a very, very long feature that was a rendition of a book that was written originally about a man, a hermit, who lives in a very arid place, austere place, and he spent his life planting trees. And this was a fiction, of course, but this is no longer a fiction, because there's actually an example of this, if you didn't already hear about this man. In Africa, there's a man called Yakuba Sawadogo, and he is actually doing this today. So it's a wonderful story. This is something that we're going to explore as well as a few other stories. I hope you enjoy this voyage today, and we'll see each other every 2 weeks if everything goes well. So enjoy. See you soon.
And here we are at this first podcast from States of Splendor. So the first destination, as I previously mentioned, is the legendary city of Rome. So let's go there with the power of the mind, and in one flash we're already there. So something that's not new to 2017 is the presence of tourists in Rome. This city is at the heart of the Roman Empire. It's where the Vatican is. It's where so much culture and history converges. And so it's nothing new that you're going to find a lot of tourists in Rome. However, nevertheless, it's definitely worth to go to Rome because it's something that's unique in the world, and that's reminiscent of so much of the world's culture. An ancient center of civilization, and even today, in the Italian context, Rome is a wonderful city. Rome is history, but it's also fashion, and it's also food. It's so many things. So today we're going to have a little penchant for the food side of things, the gastronomical side of things. And this is why we're going to try to stray a little bit farther away from the usual touristic routes. And we're going to go not too far, though, from the touristic routes. The way I found it was not too far from the Vatican Museum. Now, when you're not too far from the Vatican Museum, you can simply take a right on a certain street, and maybe 100 meters away, not even, you're going to stumble upon not a special looking building, because it's a relatively recent building. It's something quite new that just popped up. The market itself was inaugurated in the 19th century, but it was rebuilt recently. So you're going to fall upon that building, and then you're going to enter it, and you're going to find a public market, or also known as a farmer's market. And this is something that's going to be quite interesting, because even though in every city in the world there are farmers markets, in this particular one, you'll find that it's not catering to the tourist clientele, much rather to the Roman locals. Actually, it's the biggest one in Rome. It has more than 270 stands, and so you can walk in there for quite some time. So it's actually a day's activity. You go there and you stay there for quite some time. I suggest, anyways, that you take your time to stroll through the different stalls, and you learn a little bit of basic phrases like, well, I'm not going to talk Italian because I can't, I don't want to, I won't do it justice, but try to learn how to say, I would like one please, and thank you, and what's the price, and etc. So while you're going to go there, you're going to find a lot of different products, but some are absolute musts. Like for one, the cheeses are absolute musts. And for two, the charcuteries are a definite must for those who enjoy them. There's definitely a lot to go around in this market. And so I'm not going to tell you which kiosks to go there, because it's the part of the biggest joy of going to such a market is to make one's own discoveries. And actually, it's really possible to make one's own discoveries, because the treasures change with the seasons and even within the weeks. So you can go to this bakery shop and have something, and then go to another cheese shop and come back 2 weeks later, you won't find the same things. So in this place, which is the biggest market in Rome, you will definitely find some personal discoveries. However, I will absolutely recommend one thing. And even if you don't ever go there in your life, because not everybody will be going to Rome, it's what I deem to be the world's best ham and cheese sandwich. I've had ham and cheese sandwiches in many places, in Canada, in the U.S., in France, and a lot of them are excellent, absolutely excellent. But I must admit the king of the ham sandwiches that I've had so far is definitely in the Mercato Trionfale, this market that I'm talking about. So on one stand, there's quite a simple, small-looking stand with a girl that's selling various charcuteries, and so she's also selling cheese, but not your usual cheese shop. She's selling fresh cheese, and so there's various fresh cheeses in Italy, but this one is made from cow's milk, which is pretty standard. But what makes it special is that it's made out of the milk of the bufala cow, which is not a buffalo, of course. Although I used to think it was a buffalo. It's actually a variety of cow that has been in Italy for centuries, and that's absolutely perfectly adapted to its land. And so they make a fresh mozzarella. And if you think that the usual industrial mozzarella that we have in North America is mozzarella, well, it's best to think again, because this is the true thing. Thankfully, you can find true bufala mozzarella in North America and Europe and various places around the world. Of course, you're going to have to pay for it, but it's definitely worth it if you want to try this sandwich just once. You have this fresh mozzarella di bufala. The other thing is you don't want a sandwich that tastes like an earthquake. You don't want to overload it with all sorts of spices and mustards and mayonnaise. This particular sandwich only has 3 ingredients. One very good panino, which is a small bread, and which you need 2 slices of course. Well, you cut this piece of bread in 2, and then in the middle you put some cheese and some ham. Well, the cheese is, as I just said, this mozzarella di bufala, and the ham is a prosciutto. Of course, you most probably know about prosciutto, and you maybe know about prosciutto di Parma, which is, the most well known of all the prosciuttos in the world. And some people say it's the best in the world because it's actually linked with the history of the Parmigiano Reggiano, which is what we know as Parmesan cheese, the original Parmesan cheese, which is a raw milk cheese made with excellent quality milk. Although you have to be, I would suggest to, if you want to buy a Parmigiano Reggiano, to opt, if you can, for the organic version, because the organic version has a better quality milk, and also the animals are treated better, because there's one way to kind of have a good idea of the way that the animals are treated, and it's buying organic. Usually the animals are treated in a more humane way. So anyways, the milk that makes the Parmesan cheese is it makes curds, and then there's some whey left over, which is the water from the milk. And the whey is given to some pigs, and the pigs eat this whey that's the byproduct from the Parmigiano Reggiano. So these pigs actually get fattened by this whey, and their actual meat becomes very, very particularly tasty, and also has a specific texture to it. So this is what makes the true Parmigiano, the true prosciutto di Parma, what it is, and that's where its reputation comes from. Of course, there are also many other prosciuttos that are very famous. The San Daniele, which is very famous. Of course, there's very famous French hams as well, and of course probably the best hams in the world are Spanish, although it's arguable. But in this case, the Mercato Trionfale was selling mozzarella di bufala, and the ham was not a prosciutto di Parma, but was a prosciutto toscano, and this one is a much less distributed ham that you can. It's quite difficult to find in North America. It is probably distributed somewhere, but I'm not certain where. It's not very common, although it's probably possible to find it, maybe in New York or something like that. So in any case, this simple sandwich is absolutely, it's amazing. It's amazing by its simplicity and by the way that it just links together in a perfect manner. It's just a symphony of complexity, of smells and of textures and of taste, but in simplicity of ingredients. So there you go for the world's, well, my what I think is probably the world's best ham and cheese sandwich, although there might be one somewhere that I haven't tasted yet. So in any case, this was an experience eating this ham sandwich that was it was moving, I almost had tears in my eyes. It was so good. And so I quietly resumed my visit of the Mercato Trionfale, walking through them and trying to get in some sights and sounds and smells, of course, of this very simple and very, very regular looking market, but filled with, if you look for them, quite a lot of treasures. So, and after that, I just resumed my way for the day. And so that's a little glimpse of the Mercato Trionfale. If you want to get more of a glimpse of it, you can also go to statesofsplendor.com, and there's an article about the Mercato Trionfale. And at the bottom of the page, you'll find a little video about a stroll that I had in this Mercato Trionfale. So I hope one day you can go to this market that's in the heart of Rome. And if you can't, I hope that you just one day go to a public market or a farmer's market near from you and try to find a kind of version of prosciutto and some mozzarella di bufala and some very, very, very good bread, and make yourself a sandwich and just dream about this magnificent sandwich that is probably one of the best in the world. And I hope you enjoy it. So that's for that. So now we're headed to the country of Burkina-Faso. While we're headed there, we can reminisce about the influences that brought me to this subject, actually. What was one of the inspirations that I talked about in the introduction for this podcast was a book that was written by Jean Giono, which is a French author that tells of the story of a man that's walking in the arid zones in the south of France, and he finds an ancient settlement where there's only ruins and there's nobody living there anymore. He's very thirsty, he's far from any roads, and he only finds a dried up well. But when he's in this dire situation, about to lose hope, a shepherd finds him and saves him and shows him where there is a spring. And this man invites him to sleep in his humble home. And he's actually somebody that, to the great astonishment of the guest of this shepherd, the guest discovers that this shepherd is actually planting trees. He's planting oaks, one by one. And these oaks have a lot of difficulty to grow up in this arid land, so he needs to water them. He needs to take care of them. The shepherd tends to his trees by using sheep. The sheep help, actually, the nursing of the trees. However, at one point, the sheep start to become a nuisance, so the shepherd changes his strategy and uses bees and becomes a beekeeper, which helps the pollination of the trees. The man who was the guest of the shepherd leaves to go fight in the First World War, and when he comes back, he finds an absolutely lush and green, vibrant place, which is teeming with animals, actually, and a diverse forest, and has a stream running through it. And the government realizes this and thinks it's a natural phenomenon, but doesn't think about the the true source of this forest, which is actually a secret hero, a humble shepherd living in a recluse, secluded zone of southern France. Now this, of course, is a fictional character. Jean Giono was asked many times by people who this shepherd was, and he was obliged to say a little bit later on that his shepherd was actually a fictional character. Another character that was an inspiration for this story was a true historic character, very well known to Americans. It's a Johnny Appleseed. Johnny Appleseed was a preacher that was going from village to village and was offered room and board in different homes where he went to visit, and he also had one of his characteristics was that he loved nature and animals, and he said we must be kind to all living things. And also he had, therefore he had nurseries, tree nurseries. And so he had over 15,000 trees at one point in one of his nurseries. And he became a legend because of his good works in the 19th century USA. So Johnny Appleseed was a very true and very brave person who did many good works, but however, there today is one as well, and this man, his name is Yakuba Sawadogo, and he's from Burkina-Faso. This man went to school as a young child, and he was often the one that was left without food because he was the youngest one, so had to fend for himself. Growing up in his Burkina Faso, he realized that his dwelling place was having certain problems. The desert is encroaching on the living space where they live. People have more and more difficulty growing things in the land. The land doesn't bear as much fruit as before. And so this man devoted his life to discovering or perfecting certain techniques to try to make the forest win again, or vegetation in general. So Yakuba Sawadogo, using many of his years, decided to use a traditional, it was a traditional technique that already existed, which is known as zai holes. Zai holes are holes that are made in the ground where they help, with compost, they help plantations to grow. Different kinds of plants, agricultural staples are put in these holes and they grow faster, because often the land is relatively poor and doesn't have a lot of water. So that's one technique. So what he did was he decided to perfect this technique, and he made the traditional zai holes a little bigger than usual, and he changed the technique by adding manure to these holes. So this attracted, of course, this added a lot of nutrients to the soil itself, but also it attracted termites, and these termites made different pathways for living space, and they actually enabled the land and the earth to be have more air in it. So this in turn helps the crops to grow. So in doing this, he actually there's real results that happen from this. The traditional millet and sorghum crops, their yields increased, and in certain cases he was able to increase by 500 times the yield of certain trees that bear edible products. So this was one technique, and he also used another technique which is known as cordon pierreux. Cordon pierreux is a French term because Burkina Faso is a Francophone country. They use rocks and actually line the land with these rocks and These rocks are placed in such a formation that when rain comes, the scarce rain that there is, the stilt becomes mobile and gets into the water and actually rolls with the water. So these cordons pierreux, these lines of rocks, actually form a barrier where the water penetrates the earth and also the silt accumulates. So this makes various lines of nutriments in the land where one wants to sow some crops. So the result of this was also very, very telling, and he was able to reclaim part of the desert as actual land that was fertile. So this was a great achievement for Yacouba Sawadogo. In using the zai holes, Yacouba Sawadogo was able to increase the yield of various crops such as the traditional sorghum and millet crops and various fruit trees by 500%. So this is no simple work. It was really something that bore fruit, so to speak. For 20 years, Yacouba Sawadogo worked and was able to reforest some of the arid land in Burkina-Faso where he was. And throughout the years, he was able to secure about 50 acres of forested land. So this is a true achievement. Unfortunately, the nearby city of Wahiguya decided to take control over those 50 acres and claim it as their land. So this means that Yacouba Sawadogo lost dominion over this piece of land. And the forest decided to offer each member of the Sawadogo family 1 acre, but this is hardly hardly an acceptable percentage out of the 50 acres which he himself made. So Yacouba Sawadogo tried to buy this land, actually. There was a movie that was done about Yacouba Sawadogo. It's The Man Who Stopped the Desert. This helped raise awareness over the Sawadogo situation, and recently Sawadogo was trying to raise $20,000 to buy back the 50 acres. Unfortunately, $20,000 didn't seem to be enough because of speculation and the development of the land. The value of the land has greatly increased, so he therefore decided to raise $100,000. He has not, as of today, reclaimed possession of those 50 acres. However, he did raise a lot of awareness, and his techniques are being used elsewhere in Burkina Faso, but also elsewhere in Western Africa. And Yacouba Sawadogo was actually invited by the United Nations to Korea to discuss this subject. So Yacouba Sawadogo, even though he may have lost the battle of the 50 acres of forest he produced, he nevertheless won the long-term war in education. So from now on, there are these seeds that have been sown by this man and his very fruitful work, and therefore now they're going to continue in a perpetual manner. So this is a great feat achieved by the Burkinabe Yacouba Sawadogo, and we must therefore salute him as well as his work. And now for the latter part of this show, we are going to explore some good news, as we will every week. In the latter part of the show, we're going to bring to you 2 or 3 or more different news from around the world that are actually very encouraging, something that is quite often very rare. But nevertheless, if you search, you can always find some very good news. And the first one will bring us to Tunisia in northern Africa. So in Tunisia, as well as in the rest of the northern African countries, the notion of terroir has been progressing a lot. Terroir is a concept that originated in France. It was related to wine, and in fact has evolved to now embody the notion of an ecosystem. The ecosystem, as well as the part that the human plays within that ecosystem. The harmony of the two is what is known as terroir. And in different products, be it food products or wine, different artisan products, you can find subtle influence of the terroir in the product. So, for instance, this is very visible in wine. If the earth where the wine grew has a certain type of stone in its composition, it'll give a certain type of wine, and the composition of the soil will have a definite influence on the wine. So if certain grapes are grown in one terroir and certain grapes, the same variety of grapes, are grown in another terroir, the result is different because of the signature of the ecosystem where the wine was made. And this is true for wine, but it's also true for cheese. It's true for various products all around the world. And actually, it's even something that you can incorporate the notion of traditions. Let's say in one zone, carpets, hand-woven carpets, have been done in this, using this specific method for years and generations. Well, this becomes part of the terroir, and the result is what's known as a terroir product, which is actually quite a high-end product that's very sought for because of its authenticity and also because of its rarity and the skill that goes into it and what it represents for its cultural value. Now, in Tunisia, as well as in Morocco and other countries, even in all of Africa, actually, the notion of terroir has been progressing very much so, as it has in the United States. In Europe, it's already very well ingrained. So in Tunisia, there's many artisan producers that make different products that are very, very unique and that are definitely terroir products. But many of these artisans are with no power to market their products. So even if their product is amazing, they will not be able to let the world know. So there has been a company, Total Tunisie, which is a very, very big company, has launched an initiative to actually help many of these producers that are many times women. So they have a project which aims to help the economic autonomization of women in rural areas of this specific area of Oued Laabid Takelsa. I apologize for my pronunciation, of course. So there will be educational conferences and little courses on how to market the products for these different producers. They often produce different artisanal products, and this is aiming specifically producers of aromatic and medicinal herbs. After that, there's going to be expos and trade shows, which will showcase artisanal products such as, carpets, jewelry, cosmetics, and food products. So this is a very good news for women in the rural areas that are targeted by this program, and let's hope that it actually helps them to carve a certain place on the market and be able to give a certain prosperity to their zone where they live and their respective terroirs. So that's a very good initiative there in Tunisia. Our next stop brings us to France. Now, at this time of year, the end of January, this is the time when there is a very, very special product, a unique product in the world that becomes at its peak, its most ripe form. In the end of January, you will be able to find the best truffles. Truffles are definitely an amazing product. They have been recognized as such since ancient times. Actually, they used to be considered gifts from the gods because they have a flavor that is absolutely uncomparable to anything else. Well, these black truffles have been cultivated since ancient times. Well, not exactly cultivated, but sought for. They've been sought for aggressively for a long time. The most widely known ones are the black truffles from Périgord region, and these truffles are worth, well, maybe not as much as gold, but almost, actually, not very far from the price of gold. These truffles, of course, we probably heard about this before, but they need to train pigs or certain varieties of dogs which have an acute sense of smell to go in the forest where there's a lot of oak trees, and a specific variety of oak has at its roots, at the tip of its roots, there's the mycelium of the truffle, that it lives in symbiosis with the oak tree. So there's a relation between the two, and so therefore they grow a couple of meters under the ground. So they need somebody or something that has an acute sense of smell. So there's highly trained pigs that are able to find this truffle, and there's also highly trained dogs that can find this truffle. And this truffle is so difficult to find that when comes the time, this time of year actually, end of January, to sell them, well, they're quite expensive. They can go for maybe 3,290 euros for a kilo. That means about $4,000 US a kilo. And for those who are not yet with the metric system, the price by the pound is $1,820 for each pound of black truffle. Oh, that's amazing. So right now, around this time, the truffle auctions are going on now. So you can find some in Périgord, of course, but also in the Gard, in Quercy, and in Vaucluse regions. They all have their markets for the truffle. And actually, recently, it's been discovered that there was a few truffles that have been successfully cultivated in Great Britain. They brought a green oak from the Mediterranean coastline, and they planted it in Great Britain. And because of the climate, it's possible to grow there. And they were able to cultivate a few truffles in Great Britain, which is quite surprising. And but the thing is, if you go beyond the usual truffle amateur standard, you can find the white truffle, and the white truffle is strictly an Italian domain, although the white truffle is also available many times in French auctions. The best known white truffle is from Alba in Italy, and geographically speaking, you find almost all of the white truffles in northern Italy. So in the previous years, white truffle was already very expensive, being about 7,000 euros for 1 kilo. And today, well, this year, the white truffles went up to 11,000 euros for 1 kilo. That's quite surprising, and therefore you can trade a kilo of truffles for a car. And well, this is the scene of the truffles auctions, and the being white or black. You see often some very, very special specimens of truffles, and different chefs coming from world-renowned restaurants definitely want those specific specimens of truffles because they seem to be the best. So this is why this November 2017, a Hong Kong buyer bought a lot of white truffles for 75,000 euros. That's exactly $91,815 US. So that's just to say, the white truffle is definitely the nec plus ultra of the world of truffles. Now, if you would like to try truffles, I invite you very, very much so to try them if it's not already done. And it's quite easy if you go to any gastronomical restaurant. Usually they serve thinly sliced pieces of truffle in one or another dish. Now, if you want to try the white truffle, it can be a little bit more challenging because usually truffle dishes are truffled with black truffle, which is absolutely succulent. It's definitely delicious. But for the ones who want to taste the difference between the black and the white truffle, you may want to actually specifically try the white truffle. Of course, it's not given to all of us to have $91,000 on hand, so therefore you may want to try it in its best sample form. Now, its best sample form is not necessarily in some spaghetti sauce, because it's going to get diluted in all sorts of other flavors that often come with a recipe. What you'd like to do is try it in a form where it's added to a dish that actually amplifies the specificity of the white truffle. And I have just that for you. You may have, however, to go to your nearest cheese shop for this, and it better be a good one. So if you'd like to try the white truffle, I suggest to you the pecorino, which is simply pecorino being cheese made with sheep's milk. And in Italy, there's a huge lot of them. But you want to try the pecorino that has some truffle in it, because the hard sheep's milk cheese offers a kind of base which will really let the truffle express itself in its full value. So what you'd like to try is what's known as the Cacio di Bosco. Cacio di Bosco is the name of a pecorino cheese that has white truffle in it. And so you should actually try the Cacio di Bosco. It's written Caciodibosco, Cacio di Bosco. Now, there are a lot of other truffled cheeses out there. There's a very, very good Spanish truffle cheese, but most of these are made with black truffle, and they're all recommendable. They're all very, very good. However, I recommend the Cacio di Bosco for the ones who are curious about the white truffle. You'll definitely be surprised by this one. So I hope you enjoyed this suggestion, and that you go make a little voyage, tasty voyage into northern Italy with the Cacio di Bosco. Our last subject will now take us into faraway lands, and it's about this time of year when we usually in North America and in northern Europe, and probably in all of the northern hemisphere, this is the time when we use preserves. Autumn is one fantastic time when we get to make preserves. It's one of the rare times where we get to get back into sync with the seasons and with the earth in a special time when it's the time of the harvest. And when the harvest is done in autumn, usually that's the time to make preserves. In North America, some typical preserves are pickled beets and other pickled products. Now, there's one that's very, very well known thanks to Germany and thanks to Eastern Europe mainly, and that's sauerkraut. Sauerkraut is a delicious thing to eat with fantastically delicious sausages when they're very well done. And sauerkraut, apart from being a very tasty preserve, is also lacto-fermented. And lacto-fermentation actually is a process which is found in many products. You can find it in dried sausages, you can find it in certain cheeses, and you can find it, obviously, in sauerkraut. And lacto-fermentation actually adds nutriments to the product that is in state of lacto-fermentation. This is why sauerkraut is an excellent nutriment to eat during the winter, because it's something that's taken from cabbage, but when the product is finished, you have a very, very nutritious, and there's actually more nutritious products that are needed during the winter after the product is finished than with the original product. Of course, the best thing is to have some fresh products, but in the winter it's not always possible. And so sauerkraut is something that is coming to us from Eastern Germany, but not exclusively. Actually, if we look further into the history of sauerkraut, we can go back all the way to the days of the end of the Roman Empire. At the end of the Roman Empire, probably everybody heard about the barbarian invasions. Now, who were these barbarians? There were many different kinds of barbarians that invaded the Roman Empire at the time of its demise. However, one of the most famous is definitely the Mongols, the Mongol hordes that came and the absolutely humongous empire that was led by Genghis Khan. Well, at this time, the Mongols were obviously invading Northern Europe, and even the Byzantine Empire was starting to fall through other populations. And the Mongols had many different culinary traditions. Of course, being nomads, they had to have something that was easily transportable and that could be kept over time. So they actually, coming from their native Mongolia, had a recipe that was cabbage in a state of lactofermentation. So the ancestry of sauerkraut is actually a recipe that was taken from the Mongolian invaders at the end of the Roman Empire. The local population, now we know very much that they intermingled with the barbarian invaders, but subsequently the people that were born of this were assimilated in the European culture. So they still are there today, and this recipe was transmitted to the European population, which now does it with their own flavorings. Of course, like a juniper is a local shrub, and so this is the European version of the original recipe. Of course, sauerkraut now is very much different from the original recipe, but if you want to go back to the original recipe, you can, and you can find that in the original regions where these recipes came from, in the Far East, you have northern China, Mongolia, Inner Mongolia, and you have Korea as well. And Korea still has today, well, not only Korea, actually in northern China and in Mongolia and in Korea and even in Japan, you have a version of lacto-fermented cabbage, and that version is actually super popular today. Everybody knows about it. It's one of the most famous trendy foods nowadays in 2018. It's kimchi. Who hasn't heard of kimchi now? So kimchi is a very tasty original version of sauerkraut. It's the original recipe, and it's obviously in the Korean variety of it. And the specialty is that it has certain spices that have nothing to do with the Western recipe of sauerkraut. So there is actually more than just sauerkraut that's celebrated throughout kimchi. In Korean culture, there is actually a practice that's called kimjang. Kimjang is not only kimchi, it's actually the practice of collectively producing kimchi. So normally different cities, different villages, different collectivities come together at the time where people usually make preserves, this being obviously autumn. And at this time, they collectively make kimchi, and they after having made kimchi, share kimchi. And so this practice is an annual practice that is part of the cultural heritage of Korea, but was deemed part of the world heritage in 2013. The UNESCO decided that this was actually an intangible cultural heritage. So kimjang was voted as being part of the intangible cultural heritage of humanity in 2013, which is quite interesting. Kimchi is not just one monolithic recipe. There's much, much, much more to it than we know in the West. You can actually delve into it and find all sorts of variants. Kimchi is not only cabbage, like we know here, but it's also, of course, different spices. But there's also many times some parsnip in kimchi, as well as Chinese chives and a different type of other ingredients and spices. If you go to Korea, you may find in certain regions a fantastically interesting recipe that the kimchi goes with yangmiri fish, and they make the fish ferment for 2 years. And they use this fish broth to make the kimchi, and the result, apparently, is absolutely delectable. Even though I haven't tried it personally, I definitely do believe, my Korean friends, that it is absolutely delicious. If you go to Gangwon province, you will find the CK. CK is fermented fish and octopus, and it's dried octopus that is fermented with a lot of hot pepper. And this is another variant of a kimchi-based recipe. Now, Gangwon province is mainly on the coastline, so this is why they make it not only with the classic fermented fish, but also with the dried octopus. There's another recipe, which unfortunately the name I do not know how to pronounce. It's Changnanche kimchi, and this is very thinly sliced parsnips with hot pepper and merling tripe. So actually they take merling, the very common fish in the West, and they take the tripe and make it fermented quite a bit of time. And this makes a very delicious recipe, apparently, as well. And in another recipe, you may find a very interesting one. This is called the mukonji dochaltang stew. And this is made with mukonji, which is aged kimchi, and lumpfish. Lumpfish, which is in the West known for the black, relatively cheap fish eggs that we use. And this stew made with lumpfish and aged kimchi, it's considered a comfort food in Korea, and it's also considered a food with which you can fight hangovers. So that's very interesting. All in all, kimchi and sauerkraut is a very, very healthy product. And it's something that's actually good for many stomach ailments, and it can be considered medicinal, actually. It's a form of preventative medicine, which really preserves the stomach and is good for the digestive system. There's a lot of vitamin A and vitamin C. And all in all, it's a very good recipe, very healthy, but also culturally rich. It's there for you to discover on your next trip to Korea. So I hope you've enjoyed today's show. Now, if you have any comments, you can always leave them at info@statesofsplendor.com. And we'll be happy to read all your questions and comments, and perhaps answer to them. If you have any suggestions for subjects, you're also welcome to leave us your suggestions at the same email address. Also, you can like us on Facebook and, of course, support us on Patreon. We very much appreciate the help of the people who encourage us, and we thank you. And we hope to see you in exactly 2 weeks for the second podcast of States of Splendor. Until then, have a very nice week. Good evening.